Now, once again, Raymond Arroyo.
Welcome back to the World Over Live. Following the death of his son, Rick Warren has focused part of his ministry on mental health, leading to a collaboration with the Catholic Diocese of Orange County, as we reported last week. In the second part of our exclusive interview, Warren discusses the origins of his best-selling book, The Purpose-Driven Life, a recent visit by a Vatican delegation, and the channel he finds himself watching more than any other. Here's my conversation with Rick Warren. The Purpose-Driven Life is the best-selling book in the world. 36 million plus copies. It's been translated more than any book except the Bible.
Yeah.
What is the key to that success? Why were so many people touched by that book and continue to be?
You know, Ray, there's not a single new thought in Purpose-Driven Life that hadn't been said for 2,000 years. I just said it in a fresh way. I said it in a simple way. When I was writing Purpose-Driven Life, it took me 7 months, 12 hours a day. I'd get up at 4:30 in the morning. I'd go to a little study, start at 5 a.m. I was fasting till noon, and I would light some candles, and I would start writing and rewrite and rewrite and rewrite and rewrite. And one of the things I did before I wrote the book was I asked the question, how do you write a book that lasts 500 years? For instance, Imitation of Christ by Thomas Kempis.
Right.
Practicing the Presence of God by Brother Lawrence. Okay, the Desert Fathers, St. John of the Cross, Teresa of Avila. All of these great classic devotional works. And one of them, I just realized that in order to be timeless, you have to be eternal.
What is your secret to reaching people every day, every week, not only in your writing, but when you speak to them? What is it? What is this communication gift, if you will, if you could decode it? Because a lot of preachers would like to know.
Well, Jesus said, I'll make you fishers of men. And I like this fishing motif. And I think the first thing is you have to go where the fish are. Okay, they're not in church. You got to go into the marketplace. You got to learn to think like a fish. You've got to know what they like to eat. You've got to drop the bait at the right level. You use all kinds of, Paul says, I become all things to all men that I'm in some way save some. So he say, when I'm with Jews, I become like a Jew to reach Jews. When I'm with Gentiles, I become like Gentile to reach Gentiles. Today he'd say, when I'm in California, I'd become a Californian to reach Californians.
I should have left the tie at home. Is that what you're saying, Rick?
Yeah, right. Well, and the main thing is love always reaches people. Authenticity, humility. Pope Francis is the perfect example of this. He is doing everything right. You see, people will listen to what we say if they like what they see. And as our new Pope, he was very, very symbolic in, you know, his first Mass with people of AIDS, his kissing of the disformed man, his loving the children, this authenticity, this humility, the caring for the poor. This is what the whole world expects us Christians to do. And when they go, oh, that's what a Christian does. In fact, there was a headline here in Orange County, and I love the headline. I saved it. It said, if you love Pope Francis, you'll love Jesus.
That was the headline?
That was the headline.
Oh.
It was the headline. I saved it. I showed it to a group of priests I was speaking to a while back.
I love that. I want to take you back a little bit before we talk about your ministry and the things you're doing and have been doing and the example it has set for so many. Tell me about Jimmy and Dot Warren and how you see them, the librarian and the Baptist minister, reflected in your life now and in your work now.
Well, my parents were very gentle, humble, poor people. They did not have a whole lot of money. We were in rural churches. My dad never pastored a church more than about 150 people. They were very, very generous people, loving people. And they really taught me, my dad taught me how to get along with either a drunk on the side of the street or a king. He could be as comfortable with a pauper or with a politician.
And your mother taught you a love of things written.
She did. My mother was a librarian, and prior to that, she was a bookstore manager at a seminary. And so as a bookstore manager, she would get a free copy of each of the books. My dad had a pretty good sized library, and when I was ordained, my dad gave me, I think, 3,000 or 4,000 volumes himself. I began collecting books at 14. I used to read a book a day. I read a book a day for many years. Today, I've probably got 35,000 volumes in my library.
I want to peek at that
I want you to
library
see
one
it.
of these days.
Yeah.
I want to talk about you and Kay, your wife Kay,
Sure.
for a moment. In reading her book, I was kind of surprised by this.
Yeah.
She talks about both you and she, after now 40 years of marriage, just
Yeah.
about, right?
Yeah.
That when you first met, you all were not really attracted to each
Not at
other.
all.
What was it
Yeah.
that then caused this marriage? She called those early years awful.
Well, I won't say that our honeymoon was hell on earth, but it was pretty difficult. My wife and I are exact opposite in every single cell of our bodies except our love for Christ and our love for each other. And we were in love, but in early years we just didn't get along. And what happened was Kay and I got engaged, and right after we got engaged, I moved to Japan as a short-term missionary to help plant a church in Nagasaki, Japan. She moved to Birmingham, Alabama to work in an inner-city multiracial church. And so we were apart the entire engagement. I would never tell anybody to do what we did. So when we got married, it was like we were in love, but now who are you?
Yeah.
And so all
You
the
would
things,
be.
all the things we needed to work out in early marriage or in early dating, we had to work out in early marriage. And
But Rick, she was dating your friend. You all weren't even attracted to each other, but
No.
you felt it was a sort of a divine call?
oh, it was. In fact, I'll never forget, I was actually speaking in her father's church. She was playing the piano. My best friend was leading worship music. And I remember sitting there on stage getting ready to speak, and I looked over her, and clearly a voice in my mind, I mean, it wasn't audible, but it could have been audible. It was as clear, said, "You're going to marry that girl." Now, I immediately doubted that for three reasons. Number one, God has never spoken to me that clearly before or since, ever.
Really?
Okay, it was that clear. Second, I wasn't in love with her. And third, she was in love with my best friend. So after God said that to me, I just filed it away, made no attempt to even date her. And we were going to the same Christian college when school started again in the fall. I had a prayer partner who every morning at 5 a.m. we would get up and go out to the baseball dugout, and we would pray from 5 to 6 a.m. every day, and we never missed a day for a year. One day, several months into that, in the middle of the prayer, Danny stops. He says, "Rick, you're going to think this is strange, but I have this sensation that you're going to marry Kay Lewis." And I said, "Well, don't worry about that. God told me that 5 months ago." And we just keep on praying. And it's a long story, but we ended up together, and we're now 38 years in marriage. My wife is my best friend. I'm hopelessly in love with her.
I came across something that I found remarkable, particularly given you and Kay's success over the years, the growth of Saddleback, 22,000 people in this congregation.
Yeah.
You give when the purpose-driven life hit, you gave your salary back, not only for
Exactly.
that year, but for 25 years.
Yeah.
You do something called reverse tithing.
Reverse
What is
tithing.
that?
When Kay and I first got married 38 years ago, we started tithing, giving 10% of our income to the Lord and to the Lord's work. And we
Biblical
decided
principle?
that each year we would raise our tithe. Now, nobody told us to do this. We just wanted to be more generous. Every time I give, I break the grip of materialism. The way you get rid of getting is giving. Every time I give, my heart grows bigger, and every time I give, I become more like Jesus. The Bible says God so loved the world that he gave. So you can give without loving, but you can't love without giving. So at the end of our first year, we raised our tithe to 11%, the end of second year to 12%. Third year, we raised it 3%. On years that our finances were very tight, we just raised it 0.25% when the cupboard was bare and I was a poor seminary student. And on years we'd get a raise or had something happen, we'd raise it 3 or 4%. And then over the years, we've been married 38 years. Last year, we raised it another percent from 90 to 91. And I've been playing this game or deal with God for 38 years where God says, "Rick, you give to me and I'll give to you and we'll see who wins." I have lost it every year.
Oh, that's amazing.
And there's really a great joy and generosity.
I want to talk about generosity and this peace plan that
Sure.
you implemented.
Yeah.
Tell people about this and that trip to Rwanda in 2005.
Yeah, exactly. It all started when Kay was reading an article on HIV/AIDS, and she saw an article, I think it was Time or Newsweek, that said 14 million children orphaned by AIDS. And she was sitting on the couch, and she said, "I was so shocked I had to drop the magazine." She said, "I had to realize I don't know a single orphan." She says, "In my bubble of American suburban life. I don't know a single orphan. And she felt like the Holy Spirit said to her, okay, you can do one of two things. You can let this pain into your heart, and I'll make you a spokesman for vulnerable women and children and orphans and people who have HIV/AIDS, or you can shut it down and continue as a pastor's wife, soccer mom, Bible teacher. My wife's the most courageous woman I ever have met. And she said, I don't know anything about AIDS, but I'm going to learn about it. And so she began to go to Africa, she said, because they know more about it than we do. For instance, we learned more women have AIDS than men. I didn't know that. We learned that a lot of babies get AIDS through a mother's milk. I didn't know that. And so while she went to Mozambique and Malawi, this was 2003, I went to Johannesburg, and I taught in South Africa a leadership conference. And so after it was over, I said, take me out to a village. I want to see a typical church. I said, I don't care what it is. Evangelical, Catholic, Lutheran, charismatic, doesn't matter to me. So we go out and we find this little church in a village, no water, no electricity, in a tent. And it's 75 people, 50 adults, 25 kids orphaned by AIDS. And I looked at this and I thought, this church is doing more to help the poor than my rich mega church in California. And it was like a knife in my heart, and I said, that's going to change. And I remember it was 50 adults and 25 kids orphaned by AIDS. The kids are sleeping in the tent at night. They're schooling the kids. They grow in a garden to feed the kids. And the young pastor walks around, and he sees me. Now, he didn't know I'm coming. He says, I know who you are. And I said, how do you know who I am? He said, you're Pastor Rick. I said, how do you know who I am? He said, I download your free sermon every week. I said, now you're in a village with no water and no electricity. How are you downloading my sermon every week? He said, they're putting the internet in every post office in South Africa. They're called PITs, Public Information Terminals. He said, once a week, I walk an hour and a half to the nearest post office. I download your free sermon, I walk an hour back, and I teach it to my people. He said, you know, Rick, you're the only training I've ever had. Ray, that was a turning point in my life. I said, I'll give the rest of my life for people like that. And I've spent most of the last decade in little villages around the world you've never heard of, helping these barefoot evangelists, these priests, these pastors, these deacons, these ministers, these bishops who are serving faithfully when I have so much and they have so little. And out of that, we developed the Peace Plan, P-E-A-C-E, and it's based on Jesus saying, when you go into a village, find the man of peace. And peace stands for plant churches, equip leaders, assist the poor, care for the sick, educate the next generation. Now today, I've sent 23,869 of my members overseas to 196 nations. So we've done the peace plan in all 196 nations.
When I look at this, the sweep of it, when I hear stories from people on the ground in these countries about your work, they all say, you know, Rick Warren is truly non-denominational. He's focused on Christ exclusively.
If you love Jesus, we're on the same team.
But this is an anomaly in many areas of Christianity.
For many people,
But what is the obstacle, do you think? Keeping Christians apart and away from that unity that Christ prayed for, that John Paul II was such a book. Well, all the recent popes.
Absolutely.
Have
every one of them.
Done this outreach.
Every
we
one
need
of
to be
them.
one.
Exactly.
What is keeping these communities apart, and what do you think is bringing them together?
Well, I think we need to go back to the words of St. Augustine. You know, in the essentials, you know, we have unity.
Right.
In the non-essentials, we have liberty. And in all things, we show charity. And I think this is really true. Now, I think as the world becomes increasingly, particularly the Western culture, more secular, more anti-Christian, we're seeing, for instance, religious liberties being threatened and things like that. It is really incumbent on all Christians of every brand and stripe that we join together on the things that we share in common. And when I say, do you believe in the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit? Yes. Do you believe Jesus Christ rose? Yes. Do you believe he died on the cross? Yes. Do you believe in hell and heaven? Yes. Do you believe the Bible's God's word? Yes. Then we're on the same team. We might not agree on all of the minors, but we are Christians. And here's the thing. People don't realize how big the church really is. It's the largest organization on planet Earth. We don't have anything to apologize for. There's 600 million Buddhists in the world. There are 800 million Hindus in the world. There are about 1.5 billion Muslims, but there are 2.3 billion Christians who would say, I believe Jesus is who he claimed to be, the Son of God. That means 1 out of every 3 people on this planet. The church is bigger than China. The church is bigger than China and India put together. Nothing is big, and we have more outlets. I could take you to 10 million villages around the world. The only thing in it is a church. That's why there is no global problem, poverty, disease, illiteracy, or whatever, that can be solved without the church.
You recently wrote a piece, let's talk about this,
Sure.
in the Washington Post about this HHS mandate
Right.
and the Supreme Court
Right.
arguments, the oral arguments we just heard
Right.
vis-a-vis this Hobby Lobby case.
Right.
You know David Green.
Very well.
Tell me about
Yeah.
what so incenses you about this entire controversy, and might it be, Rick Warren, that the church itself, this is controversial,
Yes.
created this situation, this right to worship, because they for so long have kept their values confined to the 4 walls of their churches?
Yes, exactly. Well, there's a difference between freedom of worship and freedom of religion. Worship is an event that happens inside the house of worship. Religion is a lifestyle. It is a way of living. It is what I base my decisions on at home, at work, and everything else. It's where it colors everything in my life, the way I educate my kids, the way I do my ethics at work, the way I treat my neighbor. The Constitution does not guarantee freedom of worship. It guarantees freedom of religion. And this is what I call America's first freedom, because the first phrase of the first sentence of the First Amendment is, Congress shall make no law concerning, imposition on religion. In other words, the freedom of religion. America was founded by religious people, devout people who came here because they wanted freedom of religion. It's what made America different from every other country. And so it is our first freedom. It comes before the freedom of speech. It comes before freedom of the press. It comes before freedom to assembly. It comes before the right to bear arms. Why? Because none of these other freedoms matter if you don't have the freedom to believe and to practice your belief.
Where do you think the Supreme Court's going to go on this?
My prayer, and I believe that the Supreme Court will come down on the side of the First Amendment. I said in that article that I used to own, Jefferson had 2 very famous letters on religious liberty. One was to the Danbury Baptist, where he talks about the phrase separation of church and state. Now, it's interesting that phrase today means the exact opposite of what it meant in Jefferson's days. Today, people think it means keeping religion out of government or out of politics. But actually, the separation of church and state was, we're going to protect the church
From the government.
from the government. I believe that religious liberty may be the civil rights issue of the next decade. And if it takes some high-profile pastors going to jail over it, like Martin Luther King did over civil rights, I'm in. So be it. I mean, as Peter said and the apostles said, we must obey God rather than men.
Do you think events like this, moments like this, are actually sources of unity and moments of unity, particularly for Catholics and evangelicals?
Sure. Well, obviously, we have so much in common in protecting our religious rights and really the religious rights of other people who we disagree with on beliefs and behaviors. Muslims, for instance, don't drink alcohol. If all of a sudden they made a law that said every Muslim restaurant has to serve alcohol, I would be there protesting with that. If they made a law that said every Jewish deli in New York City has to sell pork,
Right.
I'm going to be there protesting. I don't have a problem with pork, but I'm going to protest that. If they make a law that says every Catholic school has to provide contraceptives, if you're morally convinced you shouldn't have contraceptives, I stand with you, firm with you on your belief on that, because you have a right to train your children the way you want to.
The Vatican recently sent a delegation here
They did.
to Saddleback, the Pontifical Council, the Academy for Life. rather.
Academy for Life, exactly.
Tell me what they discovered and why did they come? This was a This was a sizable group.
It was. There were about 30 bishops from Europe. One of the men who had been actually trained and mentored by Jean Vanier, and which is an interesting thing because we have a retreat center here, and my spiritual director, who grew up at Saddleback, actually went and trained under Jean Vanier too. So I'm very excited about that. But they were talking about the new evangelization, and Saddleback has been very effective in reaching secular mindset. Our church is 33 years old. Easter 2014, Saddleback is our 34th anniversary. And in 34 years, we've baptized 38,000 adults. Now, these are adult converts, people with no religious background, people who say, I was nothing before I came to Saddleback. So we figured out a way to reach that mindset, and I fully support the Catholic Church's new evangelization, which basically says we've got to re-evangelize people who are Christian in name, but not in heart.
Right.
And they need a new, fresh relationship to our Savior.
When you mentioned baptizing all these people, there is a great story that presages this recent work of yours, the Daniel Plan.
Yes, that's right.
Tell me about that. Now, this Daniel
You heard
Plan.
that.
Oh, yes. And this is at the top of the New York Times bestseller list, we should say.
Yeah.
It's 40 days to really a new life.
Yeah, it exactly
Tell
is.
me about that and how baptisms led you to this book.
That's funny. Well, it's really funny because I have always been blessed with an enormous amount of energy. And so I didn't take care of my health at all. And I really didn't care how I looked. And so it wasn't a value. So I just didn't take care of my body. I have to say, I was a poor steward of it. And one day we were doing a baptism after a particularly large membership class. And I baptized 864 people in a row. Now, we do it the old-fashioned way. I put them underwater. So I literally felt the weight of America's obesity problem in my hands.
Quite literally.
That's about 150,000 pounds if you figure 150 pounds a person. And so along about number 500, I'm taking a person, putting them under the water, bringing them back out. A thought went through my mind, Ray, and it wasn't a very spiritual thought for a pastor doing baptism. The thought was, wow, we're all fat. My second thought then was, but I'm fat too, and I'm a terrible example of this, and I can't expect our people to get in shape and be healthy for the Lord if I'm not healthy for the Lord. So the following Sunday, I stood up in front of 25,000 people, and I said, folks, I've only gained 2 or 3 pounds a year. But I've been your pastor for 30 years. Oops. So I said, I need to lose about 90 pounds. You could have heard the sucking of the air out of the congregation that day. And I said, does anybody want to join me on this? Now, I figured maybe 200 people would sign up. 12,000 signed up that day.
Wow.
Another 3,000 by the end of the week, 15,000. So now I go, wow, I've got a problem because I'm not responsible just for my health, but for 15,000 who've just entrusted me. So I went and I recruited a well-known heart specialist, a well-known brain specialist, and a well-known metabolism specialist, and said, you guys have got to help me. We put together a plan. We named it after Daniel in the Old Testament, where he says, I'm going to eat the good food, you eat the junk food. And by the way, the first year of the church that we were on the plan, our members lost 250,000 pounds.
Wow.
250,000 pounds. And it is very exciting. Churches all over America are now picking up on the Daniel Plan. And there's a curriculum that they can do in small groups. There's a diet plan, a health plan, finance.
And that small group support and the prayer is really at the center of this. I mean, there's the diet, there's the activity, but
what
this
we
is really
learned
the
is that
support.
people get healthier. And people actually, in the first year, lost twice as much weight, those who were in a group, that those who did it on their own. There's the power of community.
Tell me about the little breather you take in the day when you watch television, which surprised me. When we first met, you came up to me and said, hey, Raymond Arroyo. And I said, I can't believe you watch this
You know what? I'm an avid fan of EWTN. I make no bones about it. I probably watch it more than any Christian channel because I happen to like. Well, you know what? Because you have more shows that relate to history. If you don't understand the roots of our faith, that God has been working for 2,000 years, regardless of what brand of believer you are, God has been working for 2,000 years in His church. And if you don't have those roots, you're like the cut flower syndrome, or you're a tumbleweed. One of my favorite shows, which you repeat often, is the Chaplain of Divine Mercy.
Really?
Which I love, and when I've had a very stressful day, I'll come home, I've got it taped, and Kay and I will both listen, we'll put it on and just sit back, relax, worship, and in that time of reflection, meditation, quietness, I find myself renewed and restored. So thank you for continuing to replay the Chaplain of Divine Mercy.
Thank Mother Angelica.
Thank you, Mother Angelica.
When I walked into your office here, I was struck. You have 3 images and personal notes that confront the person walking into your office, which I have to say was a lot smaller and more humble than I ever thought. I thought we'd get this spacious, palatial office.
I'm
it's
not
a very
much
humble
into bling.
office. And there is Mother Teresa, Martin Luther King, and Billy Graham.
Right.
Why those 3? What do they give you, and what have they given you?
The only one who's missing was Pope John Paul II. Those 4 people were the greatest influences on the 20th century, without a doubt. Without a doubt. And each of them represent lessons that I've tried to learn. Mother Teresa, I had the privilege of writing the foreword to a book honoring the 100th anniversary of her birthday. And she wrote me, there's that note in there that says, be holy, for God is holy and He loves you. And Mother Teresa taught the world that the face of Jesus is seen in the poor, that we need the poor. Not only do the poor need us, we need the poor. And God has chosen, does God have favorites? Yes, He does. He loves the poor. There are over 2,000 verses on the poor in the Bible. And God says, you care about the poor, I'll care about you and your needs. So Mother Teresa taught that. Billy Graham was one of my 9 mentors. All of my mentors are now passed on in heaven, except Billy. He's 95. I went to his 95th birthday. Billy Graham taught me how to be a Christian statesman. He taught me how to relate to people of different faiths, relate to world leaders. And he also taught me about how to maintain moral integrity. And the Billy Graham Association created a list of things that they said we will not do. And I copied that and expanded it 33 years ago, and everybody on my staff signs it. Martin Luther King, Mother Teresa, Billy Graham each teach humility, integrity, generosity, and they teach values and being willing to suffer for your faith.
Do you find it difficult being identified as America's pastor? Is there a weight having that moniker attached to what you do day in and day out?
Well, it means nothing to me. I don't, what people want to say is really up to them. What really matters to me is the individual. And if notoriety allows me to influence people and point them to Jesus, that's what it's all about. You know, Ray, when I wrote Purpose-Driven Life, I wanted to start this book with the most counterculture statement I could possibly think of.
You found it.
and so I chose the phrase, it's not about you.
About you,
The 4-word march, it's not about you. And really that's like a slap in the face in the me generation where everything in our culture says, it's all about you. Okay, it's all about me, how I look, how I feel, what I want to do. It's my life, it's my body, it's my money. And when I say it's not about you, it's really about the most counterculture thing you could say. What I didn't know was how often I was going to be tested on that statement once I said it. It's not about you. And I often have to say that phrase 8 or 9 times a day. When I'm criticized unfairly, it's not about you. When I'm praised, it's not about you. When people misunderstand me, it's not about you. When people challenge me or question my motivation, it's not about you. And I have to say that I had no idea how many times God was going to test me on that the rest of my life.
Now, are you sorry you wrote it?
No. Not at all.
Thank you, Rick Warren.
Thank you, Ray, and God bless all EWTN viewers, and thank you, Mother Angelica, for having a vision, a spry little woman who said, It can be done when everybody said it couldn't be done. A tower of faith.
I agree. Thank you.